Williams, Davion Harmon, Pop Isaacs, and Lamar Washington. All of them have been added to the Texas Tech basketball roster for the 2022-2023 season, and all of them could potentially play a role at some point. I'll break down what they can do, what the rotation is looking like, and more on today's episode of Locked On Texas Tech.
Are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Texas Tech. It is Thursday afternoon, June 23rd. I am your host, Emory. I am back again today, and I want to preface this episode by saying that if you have not checked out my preview of the NBA draft, which is tonight, you can do so by checking out my latest episode at Locked On Texas Tech. I apologize for the late upload time last night, just in case you have not been able to get to that. Highly recommend to listen to that. You'll see where I think each of the four former Red Raiders could possibly go, if they go at all in the NBA draft, but you can check that out. But today, I'm going to be talking about some guys that hopefully will be hearing their name called in upcoming NBA drafts. And those are some of the new additions to the Texas Tech basketball roster. Specifically today, I'm going to be looking at the additions to the guard room. And we have 5 of them to talk about, ranging from transfers from high major programs to a mid-major star to a couple of highly rated freshmen that showcased their pedigree over the course of their high school and circuit careers. But I just want to first off say, very excited to be talking about all of those guys. You can check out the individual previews that we did with Ryan and I, and then for myself on all 5 of them. I'll have them linked into the description and talking about each of their games. I know in particular we did a lot of coverage when it came to Davion Williams and Davion Harmon, so you can check out both of those guys. But just talking about these guys in general, it is really nice to have a team with this many guards. Obviously, you lose Adonis Arms, who we talked about yesterday. You lose Davion Warren, Malik Wilson, Clarence Adoley more than likely. So all of those guys no longer coming back, in addition to TJ Shannon and Kevin McCullough, who I kind of consider to be sort of hybrid wings. But talking about the guys that Tech brings in, you have to start out with Davion Harmon. And then I'm going to spend a full segment talking about him because I really think that this team is going to rely quite a bit on Davion Harmon. You look at how much he played at Oregon. He played almost 31 and a half minutes a game. At Oklahoma, his second year, he played nearly 32 minutes a game. This is someone that is accustomed to playing 80% of his team's minutes. And to put that in perspective, last year at Texas Tech, obviously injuries to McCullough and whatnot kind of skewed things. But when you look at the overall guard percentage of minutes, not a single guard ended up playing over 60% of the minutes. And the only one that actually crossed that was Adonis Arms, and he is more of a wing. So at the guard minutes, nobody touched 60%. The closest person to that was Kevin McCullough, who played 58%. Davion Warren as well was up there. But as a whole, this team kind of ran a guard by committee approach. And some of that was due to the depth. But at the same time, just the lack of an overall point guard played a lot into that, as McCullough obviously took on a little bit of the point guard role, but something that he's really not overly comfortable with. We saw some of the struggles there. Adonis Arms developed into that over the course of the season. Malik Wilson and Clarence Adoley never really got accustomed to playing due to issues, whether it be with their offense or their shooting, and then in some cases just injury with Wilson. So when you look at what Harmon brings to the table, he's a guy that hasn't really played a lot of point guard, contrary to what a lot of Texas Tech fans I feel like think. He's more been along the lines of a secondary ball handler that's sort of been a point guard at spot minutes. When it comes to what he did at Oklahoma, Austin Reeves was the primary ball handler there for a good portion of his time. And it's not like Harmon's incapable of playing as a ball handler. He did a lot of that at Oklahoma and at Oregon. It's just not something that he was tasked to do with every single minute of the game. And presumably that's something that's going to change at Texas Tech, because you're going to see him be given the reins to be a primary ball handler at all times for this team. Whenever he's on the court, you would expect him to be the guy that runs the offense. And as a playmaker, I feel like he has the chops to be able to do that. He's someone who can get to the rim effectively. He's been good in the pick and roll. His decision-making could use a little bit of work, but I feel like he's a relatively high field guard. So on Harmon's side of things, certainly there's a lot to like about him as a ball handler. And His athleticism is going to be there. His shot making as a three-point shooter last year at Oregon took a pretty massive step forward. And I know the percentages only bear out to about a 3% increase from what we saw at Oklahoma, but going from a 33 to 36.7% shooter is quite a big improvement. And that goes from talking about someone being sort of just an average shooter and not really a pull-up threat to now he's one of the guys that you have to really key in on as a primary ball handler that can also be a positive shooter. So all those in mind, you have to say Harmon's ability to be versatile offensively is going to play into this. Defensively, more or less an average to slightly above average defender. I don't think he's going to come in and be a Clarence Sidoli or Malik Wilson type, but I don't think Texas Tech necessarily needs him to be that. Mark Adams is a system that has been very efficient. He's certainly more switchable than some of the guards that we've seen at Tech over the years. Has the athleticism, has the ability to create steals. He's a pretty decent primary ball handler or point of attack defender on primary ball handlers. So Harmon's got a lot going for him in that sense. So Davion Harmon, if I'm projecting a role for him next season, I would say realistically 31 minutes a game seems like a good mark. That's about what he's been averaging the last 2 years. He's going to be tasked with a lot of ball handling duties. So it's going to be important that he's able to play that he has the durability to play that amount of time. When you look at his seasons over the last couple of years, he missed a couple of games at Oklahoma in 2021. But aside from that, a full 31-game slate in his freshman year, played all 35 games for Oregon last year. So quite a bit to like about Davion Harmon when it comes to his durability, his ability to shoot the ball. We saw at Oregon, his ball handling experience. That's something that Texas Tech is going to need quite a bit of. So good to see Harmon there. Certainly think he's going to be the focal point of this offense, at least at the guard position. But coming up next, we're going to be talking about two off-ball guards in Davion Williams and Kerwin Walton that should factor in the rotation and have quite a bit to offer as transfers from their previous schools. But first, we've got a message from our good friends at Built Bar. From the people who invented healthy and tasty comes the latest gift to your taste buds. You probably tried the amazing coconut brownie chunk Built Bar, but guess what? Your friends at Built are giving coconut brownie chunk the Puffs treatment. That's right, the coconut brownie chunk Built Bar flavor you love and a deliciously chewy, marshmallowy, covered in 100% real chocolate. It's like a fluffy cloud of chocolate coconut brownie goodness. But stop drooling and listen about this. They are good for you. Low calorie, low sugar, high protein, all delish, just like all Built Bars. Coconut brownie chunk puffs are only here for a limited time, though. So you better go to Built.com now to make sure you don't miss out on this amazing offer. They're going fast because they taste amazing. All Built Bars are made with choline and protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. Eat something that tastes good and is good for you. The best part about Built Puffs is, of course, they taste amazing, but you can enjoy them guilt-free because they're actually good for you. They're the perfect treat, perfect when you got a craving, you need to satisfy your sweet tooth, or if you need a quick, healthy snack. Regardless of what you need, they're an excellent source of protein and will make you happy. Delicious coconut-rich sweet brownie, creamy marshmallow. Stop fantasizing. Go to Built.com to order your box of coconut brownie chunk Built Puffs right now. Again, go to Built.com, use promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your order. Promo code LOCK15 at Built.com to try out the brand new coconut brownie chunk puffs. One live NBA draft show is not enough for Locked On. The entire NBA channel is going live on NBA draft night tonight. So if you have a favorite NBA team like I do and the Blazers, make sure you subscribe now to their Locked On YouTube channel so you get notified when they go live tonight on NBA draft night. Again, that is the NBA draft show that is live for Locked On. Do check that out. I know I'm going to be watching that in between my kart racing sessions just to see what the Blazers do and where potential Texas Tech guys like Adonis Arms and Bryson Williams end up going. But in the meantime, we got to talk about a couple more of the new additions, and that is Kerwin Walton and Davion Williams, both of which kind of have similar playing styles. If I'm being completely honest. I think Davion Williams obviously comes from Gardner-Webb, which is an inferior school by a landslide to what UNC provides, but when you look at their play styles, Williams is someone that took a lot of three-pointers at Gardner-Webb, specifically almost 6.5 attempts per game last season. Over half of his shots were from three-point range. A lot of off-ball threes as well. He's a 39% shooter his sophomore year, 38% his freshman year. So he's for his career, he's almost at 39%, 80% from the free throw line. So really good shooter in Davion Williams' case. And with Kerwin Walton, at UNC. Last season, he was only 35.4% from three, but the season before, he was at 42%, and he did so on 4.8 attempts for a game from three, which would have led Texas Tech in three-point attempts this past season. So it's not like it was a low volume thing. So looking at these guys and knowing what they can provide, you have to say that both of them have been really positive shooters over the course of their college career. I mean, when you can add two guys to their roster that are near 40% three-point shooters for their career on over 200 attempts in Walton's case and in Davion Williams' case over 340 attempts, that's pretty impressive. So those two guys are going to be positive floor spacers. When you look at what they can do defensively, I would say that Williams grades out to be a little bit more positive defensively than what Kerwin Walton does. Walton obviously maybe has a little bit more experience at the high major level. We've seen what you can do shooting the ball. But I will say Williams defensively, I feel like has a lot of potential. And then offensively, from an assist standpoint, he was arguably a better secondary ball handler than what we saw from Kerwin Walton. Walton struggles to get separation off the dribble. We saw Williams at times be able to really get that burst. I don't think he's necessarily a positive athlete, but when it comes to creating separation, that is an advantage for Williams. On the flip side, his finishing at the rim is still very lackadaisical. Can't really say too much about Kerwin Walton's attempts for the rim because quite simply, we really didn't get to see much of them at UNC. When you look at his total attempts, he only took 40 shots inside the arc in his freshman season. His sophomore season, he only took a total of 37 attempts outside of the arc. So 1.2 a game for both seasons. That is not a lot at all. For reference, that would be more or less the equivalent to what Malik Wilson took last season, which was not a lot offensively. He was a guy that averaged about 2 points per game. So certainly looking at Kerwin Walton's statistics and what he was able to do on UNC, you have to say that you wouldn't expect him to be a good rim finisher either, just because he doesn't really rely on him driving quite often to be able to create points, but still an elite level spot up shooter. Same could be said for Davion Williams. Both of those guys will play into the factor, but the question is how many minutes will they be able to play? And if we highlight what they did, what was going on in the last segment where I talked about when I talked about Davion Harmon, and I said that he would play about 31 minutes a game, almost all of those as a primary ball handler. That means there's only about 9 minutes left as the one guard. Neither of those guys, I think, will factor into that discussion. But where they will factor in is at the 2 and the 3. And you have to assume that they'll get probably first dibs. Lamar Washington and Pop-Up Isaacs could be in that discussion as well, which I'll get into next segment. And at the 3, Jalen Tyson obviously will play, in, as well as Elijah Fisher. But I would expect that there would be somewhere between 8 or 10 minutes that those two can't cover. So in that situation, you have to say that the next two guys on line to get those sorts of minutes would be Kerwin Walton and Davion Williams. So more than likely, there's about 45 minutes on the table, or 40 to 45 minutes on the table for those two guys, depending on how Lamar Washington plays. And so when you add that in and you look at what Kerwin Walton in particular brings to the table, I mean, again, someone that really was non-existent at the rim in his freshman year. And I'm just now getting the official advanced stats up, and he's just taken a total of 17 shots at the rim over the last 2 seasons, which is absolutely nuts. I did not expect it to be that low. Full disclosure here, I'd been doing some research before the pod to just look at some of the basic numbers like the 2-1 percentage, but I decided during the break to take a look at what I could do when it came to looking at advanced stats, and seeing Walton only attempting a total of 17 shots within the restricted area is incredible to me. For reference, guys like TJ Shannon regularly hit 100 attempts. Keenan Evans in his last season attack, I believe, hit 180 2-point attempts from inside the paint. So to have Kerwin Walton 17 through over 60 games at UNC, that is crazy to see. So not going to be a guy that you're going to see going to the rim a lot, but if he's a good spot up shooter and the defense is there, it would be much expected for him to get quite a few minutes. Davion Williams, I feel like, is just a slightly more complete player at this point, so I would give him the nod when it comes to getting slightly more minutes. But both of them play a very similar role, and looking at the dynamic of this team, you would expect that both of them are going to get minutes at the same position, and since they play the same role, they're kind of interchangeable. But I would say that if I had an early projection, I'm going to go Davion Williams ends up getting roughly 23 minutes a game, and Walton gets about 20 minutes a game. So both of them are going to be in your 6-man type. So kind of how you saw with Davion Warren and Adonis Arms being more or less interchangeable pieces throughout most of the season. Obviously, Arms took on a bit of a bigger role at the end of the season. TJ Shannon taking on less of a role due to injuries. But that general ballpark of both of those guys kind of playing similar amounts of minutes, even if one of them is starting, one of them's off the bench, I don't think it's going to play too much of an impact when it comes to how much they play. I would say Williams is probably slightly more likely to start just because his versatility allows him to slide in at the 2 or the 3. And when you consider what Tech is doing building their roster, I think that plays a little bit more importance to him to where you can afford to kind of slide him into the starting lineup and also run him some with the second unit, depending on where you bring those guys in. And then on Kerwin Walton's case, he can be really just an absolute spark plug off the bench for you. And I know the importance of starting really isn't there for the way that Mark Adams runs his lineups and how he does his substitutions, but still, I'd say that just for the versatility's sake, Demarion Williams is probably slightly more likely to start with Kerwin Walton coming off the bench, both of them playing around 20 minutes a game. But surely both of them will play into the factor, regardless of what they do defensively. But if either of them improve substantially as a defender, that number will jump, and you will see one of them probably take a bit more of a role compared to the other one. But that's all to play for. Coming up next, we're going to look at two guys that really have all to play for when it comes to scouting out what their potential roles on the team will be. And that is talking about Lamar Washington and Pop-Up Isaacs, two absolute superstars in the 2022 Texas Tech basketball recruiting class. I'll talk about them next, but first we have a message from some of our sponsors. Talking now about Lamar Washington and Pop-Up Isaacs, I want to start out by talking about Pop-Up Isaacs because it is very noteworthy that he is a player that did reportedly suffer an injury in training camp about a week ago in one of the scrimmages for Texas Tech. It's unknown exactly how long that injury is going to keep him out, but the early word around is a significant lower body injury that will keep him out for a good portion of the regular season, needing surgery as well. So that is not ideal for Isaacs. And at that point, you might as well see him redshirt. So it's unclear exactly how many minutes he's going to take, but we're operating under the assumption that at some point he will get to play. But until then, just knowing about what he can provide as a player. We talked about it before on his individual podcast. Again, I will link those in the description for you guys to listen to. But Isaacs is someone that provides a lot of value to your team as premier ball handler. We've seen him be one of the most creative playmakers on the circuit at the high school level. And we've also seen him really be a positive shooter throughout all his attempts. Someone that can create off the dribble, can be a high-level shooter. He's been able to get to the rim quite a bit. I have a little bit of skepticism about that level of his game translating really well initially, but certainly as he develops strength, that's going to be a bigger strength. But in the meantime, between him and Lamar Washington, I feel like his game is a little bit less likely to be translatable when it comes to playing from day one, just because Davion Harmon is going to take a lot of the primary ball handler abilities and some of the responsibilities in that sense. And that's going to mean that Isaacs is going to have to play more off the ball. And we just haven't seen much of that for him at Coronado, and just haven't seen that on the circuit from him quite as much as we've seen with Washington, which I'll get into in a second. But still, Isaac's pure creativity as a playmaker, his offensive ability is going to get him some minutes on the court, regardless of what he's able to do on the defensive end. And if he's able to get back healthy again and factor in, I would expect he gets some spot minutes. But the more intriguing guy when it comes to this season, in my opinion, is Lamar Washington. And by all accounts, he's played some as a secondary ball handler, and he's also spelled Davion Harmon at times as the second ball handler behind him when Harmon can't be on the floor. So Washington has the potential to play multiple different roles for this team. He can be a ball handler. We've seen that at the high school level and also for his team on the circuit. He played a lot of primary ball handler minutes. And then at Arizona Campus Prep in his last year of high school, we saw him play. Really, it's more of a complementary player and off the ball. So both of those roles are something that we've seen him be able to do in the past. And we're looking at Washington as a player. The defense is the first thing that really sticks out. He is a grade A defender for someone coming out of high school. Showed up really well on the high school level. His on-ball defense and instincts are well. He's a pretty positive wingspan. I don't have any numbers on it, but I would assume that's plus 4 or 5 inches relative to his height. He can defend well off the ball as well, has good discipline, doesn't really jump too much, and can stay in lanes well. And then offensively, As a ball handler, I'm a little bit skeptical. His handle isn't great. He doesn't have the most natural burst, but at the same time, gets to the rim well, utilizes his strength really well, and he does have a college basketball body. From day one, he'll be a high major player when it comes to the strength and conditioning for him. And looking at the rest of his game, he's good at straight line drives. I feel like as a ball handler, like I mentioned, I'm a little bit skeptical of it, but still, that's something that he can utilize as his ability to drive. And as a passer, looked pretty good on the tape I saw. The assist numbers don't necessarily bear it out quite as well, but certainly someone that has the potential to play to his offensive strength some. And as a ball handler, I do think that there's going to be a learning curve there for sure. But if we saw Adonis Arms grow into, I certainly think Lamar Washington is capable of it. And if his scoring ability is anything like we've seen over the last few months for his conference preps and at Hoop Summit, I think that you're going to see a very impressive freshman year from Washington. And he can play as a ball handler. There's obviously going to be about 8 or so minutes behind Davion Harmon. If Pop Isaac's out of the rotation as well, that changes things too. But in the meantime, you have to say Washington's going to end up getting about 8 minutes on that front. And then at the shooting guard position, I do think Walton and Williams are going to command a good portion of those minutes, at least off the get-go, A, because of their seniority, and B, because they're already proven elite off-ball shooters. And if Harmon's handling the ball a lot, you only have one basketball. And Jalen Tyson, Elijah Fisher are two guys that can also handle the ball at the wing position. So those two off-ball guys and Williams and Walton, I think, really fit in well with that because you don't really need those three ball handlers, 1 through 3, all to be ball-dominant players. So having an off-ball player as good as Walton or as good as Williams can be important. Washington, I feel like, still is coming from a system where you played a lot of on-ball minutes. I feel like that might factor in. And just him having to learn to play a little bit more off-ball. But in the meantime, he's still going to be able to command some of those minutes at the shooting guard position. I'll go ahead and pencil him for somewhere between 5 and 8. My good friend Ryan and former co-host of this podcast also has him at around a 13-minute per game projection. You can find what he did at Red Raider Sports. He wrote up a nice piece in the forum there. You can do check that out if you are subscribed to them, which you should be. But I really do think anywhere between 13 and 15 minutes a game is somewhere that is a reasonable expectation for Washington. If he gets that many minutes, I think that's a positive. And quite frankly, if there's one guy I would pencil in to maybe have a Zaire Smith type of freshman year, it would be Lamar Washington, just because of his ability to play multiple different roles. He's a positive defender from day one. He's got a college-ready body. He's a good shooter. All those things combined, and the fact that he can be a ball handler, I think, really plays into Washington getting good minutes. But there's so much to play for. All of these guys are new additions. When you look at Texas Tech's backcourt in comparison to the front court, a lot more inexperience there, at least in the roles. Really nobody returning to Texas Tech. Obviously, you have Ethan Duncan returning, but he's not on scholarship. And if you look down the rest of the roster, you're talking about guys that have years in the program. So, I mean, Kevin O'Banner, KJ Allen, Daniel Bacho, and to a lesser degree, Jalen Tyson to some extent, all have experience, and they're all returning next season. So those guys are all coming back in the program. But these 5 guys at guard, you look at them, and they're going to be really kind of figuring out on the fly. With all of them being new introductions to the team, there's really no precedent for how things get handled in that sense. So it's going to be really interesting to watch because, I mean, I think that there's a possibility that with such a logjam, you could end up seeing all of these guys kind of factoring in different capacities. It wouldn't surprise me at the minutes production that we see now changes substantially over the course of the next few months, just because, I mean, guys could improve drastically. We saw it last year at the Adonis Arms. God forbid there could be some injuries as well, and that is obviously not ideal. But in the meantime, I mean, I do think that this initial projection of having Harmon as kind of the main guy as a primary ball handler, having Williams and Walton end up being guys that could be really important and could be high-level guys as off-ball shooters, and then also having Washington and Pop Isaacs playing into the fray. It's going to be interesting to watch. All of them have defined playing characteristics, but at the same time, it's all up for grabs at the 1 and the 2 and a little bit at the 3. But that wraps up today's basketball podcast. But tomorrow, it's our second week of the football preview. We're going to be taking a look at the Houston Cougars, Texas Tech's second opponent on the 2022 schedule. I'm excited to get into that. But in the meantime, you can follow me on Twitter at Eraser41. You can follow the official Locked On Texas Tech podcast account at Locked On TTU. You can find us wherever you get your podcast, whether that be Spotify, Apple Pod, wherever. Really appreciate all the support. If you guys leave a review, comment, message me on Twitter, whatever, giving us feedback. I appreciate all of it. I am looking at it. And if you want to subscribe to us on YouTube, it's much appreciated. This episode will be on YouTube as well as any other episode that I do from here on out. I'm glad to have the YouTube account back. But thank you for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. The first picks of the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft have been made. Search now for Ultimate NBA Mock Draft and get over 50 insiders, Odyssey Sports experts, the draft experts, the Locked On NBA Big Board. 5-episode Ultimate NBA Mock Draft is underway. And if you want something to listen to today before the actual NBA draft, make Ultimate NBA Mock Draft your second listen today. Thank you, and I will see you tomorrow to talk about some football.